Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be looking at a paladin skill known as, or rather a paladin aura known as Conviction. Conviction is a very interesting ability that Paladin has, which is useful for him and useful to just about any character in the game. There are very few characters in the game that do not get good use from Conviction, and that is because Conviction has such amazing abilities in terms of ripping the defenses away from monsters that you fight. Conviction is a skill that is utilized by a wide array of characters, and not just the Paladin. And the reason why Conviction is used by so many people is because you can obtain it through other means. But before we talk about what those other means are, let's talk about the aura itself. So Conviction is an aura that will cease to gain any more benefit at level 25. Once you reach level 25, it actually does not gain any more benefit whatsoever. It does not go up in its radius, it does not go up in its negative resistance, and it does not go up in its negative defense. This is important because when you are building a Conviction Paladin, it is important not to waste points into Conviction past the point where it is useful. Level 25 is the point at which it ceases to gain any more bonus effect after that level. You could potentially put it at level 26 just so that you would have a higher level Conviction than somebody else who is putting theirs at 25, and we'll talk about that later. There are certain monsters in the game that have Conviction. You will find them as you go around, and Conviction can be extremely powerful. There is also a specific monster who is very well known, known as Uber Mephisto. Uber Mephisto is in Uber Tristram, and Uber Mephisto has a really high level of Conviction as well. He actually runs, if I remember correctly, it's level 20 Conviction. I just want to double check that just to be sure, but I'm fairly certain, yes, he runs level 20 Conviction. Now, the thing about Conviction versus Conviction is that they do cancel each other out. So if I, for instance, am going up against a monster who has a relatively high level of Conviction, but mine is higher than his, mine will cancel his out almost completely. It depends on the levels. So if mine is level 19 and his is level 20, it will only act as a level 1 Conviction. If mine is level 21 and his is level 20, mine will cancel his out completely, and mine will work as a level 1 Conviction, and so forth and so on. Which is why having level 25 Conviction is so valuable against Mephisto, because level 25 Conviction will completely cancel his out and still give you 5 levels of effect on Mephisto. As far as I know, over-leveling Conviction by a little bit also has a good effect here because it gives you a little bit extra of a buffer versus another monster who has Conviction. This Conviction versus Conviction is a truly interesting thing, and I have used this to great effect myself to completely cancel out Uber Mephisto's Conviction in my regard. Now, what does Conviction do that makes it so amazing? Well, Conviction applies a negative defense to all monsters surrounding you. That negative defense does, of course, go up with level, and it starts out at a very meager negative 49%, which is not really that meager, and goes up to 56%, 61%, 66%, and so forth and so on, until it hits level 25, and at level 25, it is 92% negative, which is just amazing. So, well, 94% according to my game here. Negative 94% is a lot of negative defense, and you have to imagine that at negative 94%, most monsters in the game have relatively no defense left whatsoever, which means that you don't really need a lot of attack rating to hit them. So this can be good for any melee or ranged character who relies on attack rating. It can be good for skeletons. It can be good for minions. It can be good for mercenaries. It can be good for literally anyone who has to pass an attack check against a monster's defense. And this is absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work in PvP very well. It also has a negative resistance effect of negative 150%. Now, the lowest that any monster can possibly go is negative 100%. So if a monster was at 0% resistance and you apply negative 150% to them, they will only go to negative 100. However, if a monster is at 90% resistance, and you apply negative 150, you will get a much nicer effect. Now, the problem with Conviction is that when it comes across a monster that is immune to a particular element, it has a different formula. And I do actually have that formula here. So this is my formula for negative resistance. And as you can see, Conviction at the top is Conviction, negative 150%. It has Fire, Cold, and Lightning. It is important to note that Conviction does not reduce poison resistance. It has a 20% effectiveness versus immunes, which means 150 divided by 5, which is 30% reduction. Which means that if a monster is within 30% of being broken, that a monster will be broken. So, for instance, let's say you had a monster that was 120% fire immune. You will bring them down by 30%, and that 30% will, in fact, break that immunity down to 90%. Now, there are other things in the game, like negative resistance items. I think I have one of these right on me right now, yes. This is the Nightwing's Veil with a cold facet in it, and as you can see, it has negative 5% enemy cold resistance. That will not break immunities, but it will stack with this after the immunity is broken. So it's important to remember that if you bring down a monster's resistance from 120% to 90, your negative enemy cold resistance can then take effect and bring it down from 90 to 85, and so forth and so on. This kind of thing is actually really effective with Conviction and can make Conviction even more effective than it otherwise is. Now, unless you are a Paladin, you are not going to have Conviction at level 25. The other way to obtain Conviction is with the rune word Infinity. Infinity is a very expensive rune word that requires the runes Bur, Mal, Bur, Ist. 2 Bur runes, a Mal rune, and a Ist rune, which is extremely expensive. Most people will not get their hands on an Infinity rune word. I don't want to fool any of you guys into thinking that you have a chance of getting your hands on an Infinity, like that. So many other YouTubers will go through the process of telling you that this build requires an Infinity. And then when you try to get your hands on one, it's next to impossible unless you want to break out your wallet. Now, and I mean that, like most of the people I think that have their hands on an Infinity usually end up paying for them. So Infinity does have Conviction on it, and it is level 12 Conviction. Level 12 Conviction is a negative 83% defense, monster defense, and a negative 85% to maximum resistance. So we have to apply the same calculation to the negative 85%, and if I remember correctly, it comes out to minus 17 to the maximum resistance of a monster. Which means that if you have a monster who is 110% resistant to an element, and you apply your level 12 Conviction to the monster, it will bring the monster down by 17, which is below 100 and will break the resistance, but only just barely. You're talking about like 93% resistant to that element. And if the monster is 120% resistant to that element, Infinity will not break the immunity. It is also important to note that Conviction tends not to break cold immunities. I don't want any of you guys to get the false impression that you can go out with an Infinity polearm or maybe a second character and have like a level 25 Conviction Paladin in tow and that you can break immunities. You cannot. 90% of the time, you cannot break cold immunities. I don't know why they balance the cold-resistant monsters in this way, but for the most part, cold-resistant monsters are unbreakably cold immune. There are very, very few monsters in the game that can be broken by Conviction with cold resistance in mind. Lightning and fire, on the other hand, get broken all the time. And to give you guys an idea of what kind of stuff I run, to give you the impression that I know that the majority of the cold immune monsters in the game don't break, I'm going to tell you. My Conviction Paladin runs negative 150% conviction. He also runs a Medusa's Gaze, which is a level 7 lower resistance proc. And even with level 7 lower resistance and level 25 conviction, I still cannot break most cold immunes. Now, it is important to note that when you apply both conviction and lower resistance together, they both still suffer penalties. You would think that if conviction broke the immunity, lower resistance would be able to break the immunity further. But essentially how it works is if a monster is immune to an element, lower resist and conviction both get applied the penalty whether or not the immunity is broken or not. So if you come across a monster who is 110% fire immune and you apply your conviction to the target and break the immunity, lower resistance is still applied the 20% effectiveness penalty, which is rather unfortunate. It will still bring the monster's resistance down further, but only at the reduced penalized value. So keep that in mind as well. This is the reason why negative enemy lightning or negative enemy fire or negative enemy cold resistance is so powerful. Now, when it comes to a cold sorceress specifically, cold sorceresses don't need negative resistance. So a cold sorceress gets less use out of conviction than most characters do. However, you could use a Infinity Polearm mercenary on a cold sorceress to greater effect by just simply not putting points into cold mastery. You might say, well, why is that? Well, if you don't put points into cold mastery, you're going to need negative resistance in some other form, and utilizing conviction as your form of negative resistance is an interesting way to go about it. It would free up other skill points that would allow you to utilize those skill points elsewhere and maybe make a very nice hybrid build. However, I don't recommend building any character around an Infinity Polearm, just simply because they are that hard to obtain. If you are looking at building a character, especially a fresh character for ladder, and your idea of your ladder character is an Infinity Polearm, I'm going to stop you right here, and I'm going to go, whoa. Build your character without the Infinity Polearm. Find a way to make your character work without that polearm. If you manage to get one, if you manage to get your hands on an Infinity Polearm, good for you. Then build your character around that polearm later. But don't build your character around the Infinity Polearm before you get your hands on the Infinity Polearm. You will be disappointed. What skills is Conviction very good for? Well, any skill that applies elemental damage, it can be extremely good for. One on the Paladin specifically that stands out is Vengeance. And I will be doing a video on Vengeance for another day, so that's not something we're going to be covering right now. Right now, we're just covering Conviction. Conviction also works very well with Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, and Holy Shock. The downside is that you can't really have both with native use. There are items in the game, like for instance the Rune Word Dream, the Rune Word Dragon, the Rune Word Hand of Justice, which will provide you with these auras so that you could potentially use Conviction along with these auras. And this is a very interesting way that you can combine, say for instance, Conviction and Holy Shock together for a very nice effect. I think that's just about everything that needs to be covered for Conviction. If you have any questions about Conviction, anything specific, feel free to write them down in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer. As always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.